typical student who comes to Brother Rice is a Catholic student. In the old days, 90% of them would come from 5 Catholic feeder schools. In the modern era, we have students from 60 different schools. About 50% are coming from a public school, and about 50% are coming from a Catholic school. The majority of the population is Birmingham Bloomfield based. The next ring is a Troy, Southfield, West Bloomfield, Farmington, Pontiac, Royal Oak ring. And then, as it always was, there is an outer ring that comes from points east, west, north, and south. Ypsilanti, Pinckney, Grosse Pointe, Richmond, Milford, Flint. We get them from all over.
And what the expectations were, do you want to elaborate on that?
Happy to do that. One of the famous words that was born out of Coach Fracassa's early days at Brother Rice was the Birmingham Cake Eaters. And he used that line as a way of teaching us what it meant to be entitled and what he expected from his athletes, in which there was no entitlement. The Cake Eaters was a derisive term. It was a negative. It was the kids who didn't do the work. It was the kid who wanted the shortcut. It was the kid who wanted to look good but hadn't put in the time and effort to really be good. And I can remember that term distinctively used at key times as a lesson, sometimes pretty aggressively and pretty negatively, because he clearly had in mind a view of what a great athlete needed. And clearly effort, perseverance, dedication, determination, kind of a doggedness was absolutely what he wanted to incorporate. And he was tough. I mean, we thought he was so hard back then. And of course, I think most of us didn't understand it back then. I think we all understand it today. It was one of his lessons for conveying mental toughness, that what was necessary going forward was real work, not fake work or kind of work or some work, but real live work, which if you follow back his career, particularly at Michigan State, absolutely was part and parcel. I mean, one of the things to remember about Coach Fracassa was that he was an all-state baseball and football player in high school who never got off the bench at Michigan State. He played behind some fantastic, in fact, future NFL quarterbacks who kept him on the bench. And I think that respect that he earned during his days at Michigan State had everything to do with the kind of dedication and perseverance that he showed when many athletes would be crushed that their dreams and hopes of being a star this or a star that or all-American were dashed. It never affected him in a negative manner. He used it as a positive, and he used it to teach the Birmingham Cake Eaters how they should carry themselves.
It's a pretty famous story with a lectern.
Yeah, you know, so the team that played in the fall of 1968 and that returned in the fall of 1969 was, by their own definition, not very well disciplined, and hadn't really taken seriously their experience. And I have it on good authority from several of the participants in that room that day that on August, whatever the day was, back in the fall of 1969, they were introduced to Coach Fracassa. And they sat in the seats, and Coach Fracassa began to speak. And at some point in the monologue, and I think fairly early on, it was clear that the students in the room were not demonstrating the kind of respect or were not listening as attentively as he would have expected. And the coach decided he was going to shake things up a bit, and so he took his fist and he pounded the top of the lectern. What he didn't know, and what nobody could have expected, was he did it with such force that he destroyed the lectern right in front of the players in front of him, collapsing in front of him, making all kinds of noise. It left an indelible impression on these young men, who said that literally 10 minutes into their meeting with Coach, they knew that things were going to be extraordinarily different. At the time, Coach was probably 35, 36 years old, extraordinarily fit, a strong former athlete who hadn't lost, sorry?
Former boxer.
And a former boxer who has always had enormous hands. I don't even know if that's, his ring had to be specially sized from Michigan State. I don't know, it's whatever the standard size is, he's like another 30% larger. But he smashed that podium, and I can tell you from the participants there, I've heard this probably from 4 different guys, they will never forget that moment, and it was like the light went off, and they knew that they were dealing with a totally different individual who they probably feared that day, and then grew to respect, but still had the fear factor probably for a number of years. But that first group, they'll never forget that moment.
It was like reining in wild stallions.
Exactly. He set the tone very quickly. I'll tell you a related story to get a little flair to this. I have it on authority from several Brother Rice students who were freshmen on their very first day of school. Their very first period of class was with Coach Fracassa in PE. And they were in the gym, and I don't know, the 50, 60, 70 of them, whatever it was, and Coach began to take roll. And in the course of taking roll, some of the boys were not listening to him. And apparently he stopped taking roll. He walked over to one of the boys, whispered in his ear, presumably, be quiet, went back to the podium, and continued to take roll. About a minute or two later, this young man apparently had not gotten the message. And Coach walked back to him, picked him up by his collar, lifted him off the ground, pinned him against the gym bleachers while his feet were dangling, and proceeded to take roll for the rest of the class. When he was done, he turned to the young man and said, "Are you done?" And the kid, of course, shook his head, and he put him back down. And again, to those freshmen who had no interest in playing football, it was an incredible message that this was somebody to be listened to. He was serious, he was determined, and he was going to make his point. Coach Fracassa has always had respect for individuals that put in the work, that were a part of the team. It's one of the reasons why, if you look throughout the years in our yearbook, where most schools will have, let's say, 100 freshmen and 60 sophomores, and then 30 juniors, and then 10 or 15 seniors, you'll find instead that very often our senior class on the football team is represented by anywhere from 25 to 45 students over the years. And you'd say, well, why would that happen? Why would so many seniors stick with it? Why, when they know they're not going to play? In many cases, when they have clearly understood for 4 years that their odds of playing are only when the score is significantly in our favor. I think the story really is a two-part story. On Albert's part, I think coaches always believed that one of the great values of football were the life lessons it could teach. And whether you were on the field or not, those lessons could be taught. In fact, as he's gotten older, and I've gotten to know him more as a senior coach in my position, one of the things that I've concluded, and he's admitted to this, is that he much prefers practice over the games. Because it's practice where he can teach and he can work individually with the kids. And no matter whether they are the star of the team or number 45 on the senior class, he's got an opportunity without the demands of the clock running against him or the score of a game or whatever the circumstance may be, he can teach. And I think he absolutely has cherished that more so as he's gotten older. And I think partly because he's had the reinforcement of having. Okay, so we'll pick up on that train of thought. So I think one of the reasons why Coach now even more than before understands the value of his impact on the students and the athletes that he works with, particularly the end of the bench guys, is because of the reinforcement he's gotten from so many years of graduates who come back 5 and 10 and 20 and 30 and 40. And I know some guys that he taught at Shrine back in the early 60s who still come back and still talk to him and still marvel at the way they felt. In fact, I would say for the most part, while times have changed, they certainly don't look like they once did, I don't know that they've ever lost that feeling that he cared and that he wanted to make a difference in their lives. I don't know that a surrogate father is the right phrase, maybe an uncle, I'm not sure what it is, but it certainly was more than just a coach. And so I think that's why coaches, even nowadays, much more determined that the value of what he does is less the game time experience and more frankly, the 6 other days a week when he really gets to teach and lead men. I'd say the other side, though, is it's not just him. There are all kinds of students who know full well that they're never going to be the star of the team, who just want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, who, because now of 42 years of history, have talked to graduates and former players who will say to them, don't worry about how good you are. Don't worry about if you can play. You want to be a part of something special. You want to be connected to this guy. And so I really think it goes both ways. And the end result is, I could give hundreds of stories. By the way, just for a number here, we did a rough calculation about 2 years ago that out of our, and we're currently 9,488 graduates in our 51 years. Albert has probably coached somewhere in the vicinity of 1,800 of our graduates. So 25% of all the students who've ever gone through Brother Rice probably were with Coach Fracassa for at least a 3 to 4 month period every winter, or I should say every fall and winter, playing that sport. And when I say that I can tell you hundreds of stories, I'm not making it up, because I know a tremendous number of those guys. I know how they feel. I see them. They come back to all the games. They come back to school. They come back just to visit Coach. Most days there's somebody who's in the building who's a graduate, and after they shake my hand, we'll say, hey, is Coach in today? Hey, can I talk to Coach? And I know that it started not because of the fact that they caught a pass here or that they were put in this position on the field for this particular play. It's always about that feeling, that relationship that he builds, the bond. Really, that's what it is, the bond that he establishes. Because at the end of the day, and this is the thing that makes it special, he's not there to teach football. Football is the vehicle. He's there to teach life lessons. And he's obviously great at the football side. He's now, I think he's now 4th in the nation for most wins. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe he's 3rd, whatever it is. He's certainly 1st in the state of Michigan by a large number. But they never come to talk about the victories. They never come to talk about the win streaks or the state championships. They come to talk very personally. In fact, to give you a snapshot, and Ted, you may have been there that day. This fall, when we played for the state championship, on the day before, Thanksgiving Day, we had the last practice of the year, and it's usually a very special event. I would say that there were at least 100 grads. It could have been 200. I didn't exactly take a count. I will never forget, and we took lots of pictures of it, and I'm sure the people there won't forget, that when it was time for the practice to end, and Coach wanted to bring his team to meet all the graduates, it began by him going down the line and hugging every single graduate who was there, giving them, the slap on the cheek, the I remember this, the how's your mother doing, the whole thing. For 100, 200 guys, that was the starting point. And I saw tears in the eyes of a lot of guys. Many of them, again, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. It didn't matter because of that connection and that bond.
The other thing that happened was
the players that day, when the practice was over on Thanksgiving Day, were handed a packet of, and again, I don't remember the exact number, but I'll say 100 or so letters written by former players of Coach. And generally they were addressed to the guy who wore their number. So if I was number 10, I wrote the number 10 on the team. But eventually everybody saw them. Very heartfelt, very passionate. And honestly, after I saw the kids read some of them, and I didn't say this publicly at the time, but there was no doubt in my mind that short of the greatest team in the history of high school football to play us the next day, we weren't going to lose. There was no way, watching how those kids walked off that field and seeing the emotion, the energy, the bond that was at its heart, the 79-year-old guy who's been doing it for 42 years, there was no doubt in my mind, anyways, that they weren't going to lose. Literally, you'd have had to kill them the next day to beat them, which, as you know, particularly in the sport of football, determination and grit count for a whole lot, and in fact, at certain times, a lot more than talent. Got to still have the horses, but if those horses don't care, don't really want to give it when the fight is on, it's one of the things that I think distinguished us throughout that playoff run. That's true for the past 40 years. We play the toughest schedule around. So teams that play us and see that we've got losses, I think sometimes are fooled into thinking, well, they're not that good. Not so much. Not so much.
Coaches said
it was an amazing year. Again, and there have been many amazing years, obviously, throughout the day. I think you and I are probably biased because of our years of our particular classes in the mid-'70s that certainly were the first ones that really established Brother Rice as a football powerhouse.
Is the 21-game win streak still the longest? Or 22 games?
My answer is probably. I don't know offhand. There's been so many streaks over the years. But what I was going to point to was that the thing that is consistent throughout all those teams, and I've been associated with the school for 40 years. Not that I've been here every year, but I've seen 40 years of this. There have been a lot of different teams. He's had big teams. He's had small teams. He's had really fast teams. He's had wishbone teams. He's had Johnny English, the great thrower, who probably they didn't run the ball 2-3 times with Johnny, but they threw it all day long. He's had all kinds of different teams. People talk about systems, right? A coach has a system. Albert's system has never been the X's and O's. He has always adapted his teams to the talent he has, but what has been consistent is the way they've played. The heart, the grit, the determination. When you consider, going back to your question earlier, Ted, about why is it that he sticks with guys and lets them remain on the team, even knowing that they're not going to be a contributor, if you will, on the field. He knows the price they've paid. His conditioning drills, you know, the infamous green bays, the four corners, guys never forget that. And when they're graduated, they're glad they never do it again, because it's character building experiences where you are being pushed to the limit by a guy who is affirming you but challenging you to get better and better and better. That's where the difference comes in, and that's what comes through in the way they play. There have been lots of times where I have watched us play where we were not the better team in terms of the athletes on the field, where we won. A lot of games won at the end when it was really emotional and tight. Why is that? Why is there some consistency in Coach's case? And I'm going to forget the exact number. I think it's 403 total times, of which Brother Rice probably represents like 380 of it or something like that, or 370. Why has that happened so consistently? Again, it goes back to, it's not the X's and O's. It's not the fact that we do this or do that in terms of our style of play. It really is about the kind of men that he builds and forms and raises, and you know, the never, never, never give up mentality, which is frankly among the most powerful themes that I consistently hear back from alums. I'll tell you, I'll tell the story because it's a great one. So we have a graduate, I won't use his name for the purpose of this, we can always put it in later if you want, from the class of 1987, who was one of his captains. He was 6'2", 210, offensive guard, nose guard on defense, tough kid, Irish Catholic, the scrapper, right? The guy who's in all the battles, both on the field and sometimes off the field. A good guy, but tough as nails. Goes off to college, didn't get a scholarship, graduates from a Big Ten school, goes off into the corporate world, gets married, raises a family. About 6 years ago, he's what, maybe 35, 36 at the time, contracts a very serious form of stomach cancer. Doctors tell him, you're going to have a hard time, this is going to be a battle. And the only reason I know this is because he wrote us a long letter about this that he wanted Coach to read. 3 kids, all under the age of 5, 35, 36 years of age, given essentially a death sentence, and if not, a very difficult challenge. Goes down from 210 to 110 pounds, 2 years of radiation chemo, and said the only thing that kept him alive were the lessons that he had been taught by Al Fracassa 20 plus years ago, that he translated from a football field and his teammates to now his wife and kids. He was not going to die. I mean, he said, you'd have to kill me to let me die. I was not going to let this cancer defeat me. So a year later, after fighting off the chemo, the radiation, losing 100 pounds, he is back at full health. He gets a clean bill of health. He's back to 210 pounds. And his story is all about Coach Fracassa and the lessons he learned 20 years before. It's not about what he went through. It's not about anything else. It was astounding. It was a very long letter, very moving. Coach has got it. It brought him to tears if you mention it. And I was gifted to have a chance to read it as well. But I would say that would be not an atypical, certainly an extreme, but not an atypical story of the kind of character lessons that our students have had the privilege of learning from this icon for the past 42 years.
Coach Fracassa.
Well, you start by the expectation. Coach Fracassa did hold his players, does hold his player to a higher standard. And the standard really is, again, not so much about their physical preparation, although that's very important. It's not so much about the academic preparation, though he obviously wants students to do their best. It comes back to a character and integrity expectation that I would say he teaches on a situation-by-situation basis. So here you have 14 to 18-year-old high school boys. Occasionally, things happen, mischief ensues, or challenges, or in the modern era, frankly, family matters are a common distraction for kids. And I think one of the things that everybody understands, and I'm going to go back to a phrase I used before, he is affirming but challenging. I don't think there's any doubt that any player knows that he wants them to be their best and to make good choices, to represent their school, their family, their faith well. But he affirms you. And I think that is the great lesson, frankly, that most of our other coaches and teachers have learned. In fact, if you really want to get a much more macro about this, so what's been Al Fracassa's impact on Brother Rice? He wasn't here when it started. He wasn't a Christian brother. He was, by his own admission, just an average teacher in the classroom. How did this guy for 42 years, who has this incredible record and this incredible bond, how did he have such an impact on the school? I think clearly, at least for me, the single most powerful lesson that he has passed on to other teachers and to, frankly, all the other coaches who look up to him is the ability to combine those two attributes simultaneously, which is hard in the modern era. When you challenge a kid today, when you say you're not doing it well enough, people take that as an attack on self-esteem. Or they've been coddled along the way and they've never really been pushed. They've always been told they're wonderful and kind of patted on the head. Coach Fracassa has a unique gift for still making you feel legitimately and sincerely that he cares about you and he loves you. But at the same time, he has not in any way, shape, or form backed off of the challenge to be your best. And again, across the board. Certainly when they're on the athletic field, he's talking about any number of athletic virtues. But when he's off the field, he is absolutely talking about those virtues that translate across. So being disciplined. You know, somebody wants to fight you after the game on a Friday night, walk away. That's the same as not jumping off sides on 4th and 1. Those kinds of values and virtues he talks about and teaches all the time. Loving their parents, telling the truth, taking care of their younger siblings. these kinds of messages, which are critical in the modern era, absolutely reinforce the values of the school. They reinforce the values of every family. They reinforce the values of our faith. And he's able to do it, again, with this dual ability to be tough and demanding. And yes, he yells and he raises his voice. But I rarely remember, over the 42 years, a student who wasn't more than just temporarily upset that they had been the object of his attention that day. And as I say, the impact on the greater schools, I really think that's become imbued throughout the entire institution here. I think our teachers have adopted this almost by osmosis as much by reputation.
How has Coach Fracassa affected the student body, the non-athlete? What effect has he had on them?
That's a great question. How has Coach affected the non-athlete? I'm going to give you a perfect example. You will remember from your day a student by the name, and I'll say his name because this was very public at the time, don't mind it at all, Kevin Kern. I'm sorry, Kevin Gibbs was his name. His professional name is Kevin Kern. That's why I got it wrong. Kevin, if you remember, came to Brother Rice. If he weighed 100 pounds, I'd be surprised. Kevin was legally blind. He had, I'm not even sure how to describe his glasses other than they were telescopic or microscopic, or there was just, I've never seen anything like it before. And Kevin was clearly not an athlete, was never going to play football. He wasn't dumb by any stretch. In fact, he was a brilliant guy. But in terms of his physical appearance, he certainly wouldn't, you would have never thought of him as a football guy. Well, I'll tell the story backwards. And so about 5 years ago, Kevin was in town, and he's a professional musician. And I found out about this, and I called him up, and I said, Kevin, if you're in town and you're going to perform somewhere and you don't perform at the school, I'm going to rip your transcript up. You have got to come back here. I want the students to see what you're capable of. We all knew him back then once, maybe by the end of his freshman year, that he was an extraordinarily talented pianist, and he was a tremendous musician, and he earned his respect on his own doing that. But again, I go back, the first couple weeks of school, he was the kind of kid you would probably say typically that would have been picked on. Again, going back. 5 years ago, I get him to come to Brother Rice. We go over into St. Regis, the church next door. I load the entire student body, all the faculty members, of whom probably 10 to 15 were here then, and they remembered Kevin. Kevin starts to play. The kids are mesmerized. He's brilliant at what he does, very unique. Plays a couple songs, stops and says, hey, is Coach Fracassa here? Everybody pauses. I didn't know if he was there. Well, of course he's in the back. And Kevin says, and he, again, he's blind. He's not Stevie Wonder blind, but essentially he can't see anything other than just, I think, general images. He says, Coach, would you come down here? Coach walks down, and I think the entire student body, myself included, was wondering what was going on here. He gets to the stage. Kevin stands up from his piano bench, puts out his hand, and Coach hugs him. And they both start to cry a little bit. And Kevin tells a story that when he was a freshman at Brother Rice, uncertain of his surroundings, people, all the rest of it, who was the first guy to come up to him, put his arm around him, and tell him he'd be okay, he was going to make sure he was all right. I think he may have had him in class. I'm not certain about that, but honestly, I don't think he was. I think Albert sensed something in the hallways that day. And here's a guy, 37 years later, recognizing that in front of the entire student body, something I didn't know about, Coach. I wasn't surprised by it, but I had no idea of it. I think that's the answer to your question. I think the presumption of the outer community, those who don't know, is, well, he's just a football coach. He's just with the football guys. What they will never understand is that he had that kind of a relationship with all kinds of non-football players. In fact, I would even go to argue that he had that relationship with a lot of the parents. I would say he had it with a number of siblings. I'll give you another perfect example. So we have a kid by the name of, he's a kid compared to me, Mike Cassidy, and you may have read about this. So here's Mike Cassidy, a a developmentally disabled young man who graduates from Farmington High back in 1980, I think 3, 4, something like that, who begins working at Brother Rice in the fall of 1986 when his brother is a senior. He works as a janitor. Mike, very similar to Kevin, very slight of build, very definitely physically challenged in certain ways. Who ends up becoming a manager for Coach's football team? Who ends up being on the sideline? Who ends up speaking to the players? Who ends up being parts of the huddles? Who ends up saying the prayer with these kids? For the past 25 years, Michael Cassidy has been employed by Brother Rice, but I would make the argument that his real relationship here is with people like an Al Fracassa who have accepted him, cared for him, brought him into the fold. And again, if you lined up 100 guys and said who are the football players and who aren't, Mike's number 100 or number 99. It never mattered. Coach never saw that. He never cared about the physical gifts. Instead, what he saw was this person. He saw that he could make a difference. And just as a side note, when Mike Cassidy was recently inducted into the Silver Society here at the school for 25 years of service, and he was also the one and only, I don't think you know this, the one and only non-alum who was ever chosen as an honorary alumnus by the school. I got more emails than I've ever gotten in my 8 years here on the job from alums saying, congratulations, thank you, well done, we love Mike. Unbelievable. 2 great examples of people very important to the school's history who had nothing to do as football players, but had everything to do with Al Fracassa and the difference he made.
Tell me about those 2 projects.
You know, Coach Fracassa has been here for 42 years, and he has received many accolades.
He's been here 40 years.
Do my math. Fall of 69, fall of 43. This will be his 43rd. Or no, wait, let's do, seasons.
69.
How about if I just say more than 40?
Yeah.
Save myself the counting nightmare. Okay. So Coach Fracassa has been here now for more than 4 decades. It's an incredible period when you think about a 51-year-old school that he's been here since 1969. It's really a tremendous gift to us. And in fact, other than Bob Stark, those are the 2 most senior members of our staff. Coach Fracassa has always been very uncomfortable with the thought that anybody would do something for him financially or specially. He likes the recognition. He loves seeing his guys. He loves going to dinners. I mean, guys take him to dinners and lunches all the time. But he's very uncomfortable with the notion that he's being paid or that he would be paid for what he takes as what he does. 2 times he has had his arm twisted where essentially the community said, no, we're going to do something for you. The first was, and it was about 10 years ago, and I'm trying to think if it was connected with any particular event. I don't know that it was. But his graduates got together, held a fundraiser at which they raised a sizable amount of money, and they gave him a brand new Lexus, which was a wonderful gift and ironic in the sense that Albert's the last guy who wants to be in a Lexus, and yet his guys wanted him to be in something like that as a sign of their respect for him. He has always been extraordinarily grateful. In fact, he still drives that car to this day. That car is important to him. And again, it has nothing to do with the miles or the appearance. It's that his guys did it for him. The second event was about 7 years ago. In fact, my first year as principal at the school, when it was clear that the green stuff that was on the football field, which was primarily weeds, was no longer a satisfactory playing surface. And so we gathered together a large number of his graduates and said, boys, we need to raise the money. It's time to do a synthetic turf field. And yes, what else would we call it but Fracassa Field? It will come as no surprise to anyone that I didn't end up having to twist too many arms. I didn't have to get into too many arguments. The question generally was, how much do you need and how much can I give? And after a couple months, we had raised sufficient funds that had it been the right time of year, we would have started building right away. I don't think we had it ready until October, waited until the springtime to do the building. But the bottom line was that the community responded, and they responded almost instantly. And I can tell you any number of guys, the moment I uttered the words Coach Fracassa in the conversation, it was, you know, what was the line from You Had Me at Hello? I mean, it was as soon as I said his name, guys were willing to help, and they wanted to do what they could, and they wanted to contribute without hesitation. It was a very special experience. I'm guessing that in the near term, as our coach turns 80 and finally contemplates retirement, that when that moment happens, there will be a third event that I suspect will probably dramatically bypass the first two in terms of size, and that will be extraordinarily well-attended events and well-financed, again, because of that unique bond. It's hard to explain to somebody. My first year on the job, meeting the captains from his 1969 team, who at the time were 50, I think they were 55, tearing up, telling me about an event from 40 years ago.
Was that the Nuff?
The Nuff brothers. It was hard to imagine. I'll rephrase that. It was easy to imagine given my knowledge of Coach and given my knowledge of the history of the school. But it's hard to imagine that over the course of time, those feelings don't diminish some. And what I found is they really haven't diminished. That people still have an extraordinary, it goes beyond a passion. I'm not sure what the right words are for it, but there is this connection that they have never forgotten. They are always thankful for. And to see their face and Coach's face when they see one another, and just the joy that brings to both parties is really an extraordinary thing. It's a special thing, and it really, again, it speaks not to victories, not to championships. It speaks to the kind of man he is and has been, and the extraordinary difference that he makes in the lives of every one of the kids who he touches, both on the field and off the field. Kevin Gibbs, Michael Cassidy, two great examples of the impact of our tough guy football coach, who of course only likes tough guy football players. Not.